Welcome, everybody, to your third session. This session is on strengthen, weaken, and flaw questions. Now, just a couple of things about the types of questions we'll be looking at today. So, strengthen and weaken are by far the most important question types on the GMAT when it comes to critical reasoning. So, most of your questions are going to be strengthen or weaken, or some sort of variation of strengthen or weaken. Flaw is also a question type that you can see on the GMAT. The thing about flaw is that it's not very common, but it is very useful when you're learning. So the good thing about flaw questions is if you're good at flaw questions, then you can actually understand the weaknesses present in arguments better. Now, during this session, we will try to keep everything as exam focused as possible. And we're going to look at maybe a few terms from logic. But, one of the things I very quickly realized back when I really started getting into logic was that we don't really need technical logic for the GMAT. What the GMAT is really looking for is just, the natural language. So English, just normal English. That's all you need for the GMAT. Now, just to be clear, you may see a few terms during this session, but they're not necessary. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize some of those terms. You could keep some of those terms in mind because in our classes, one of the things that I want to do is I want to make sure that you guys are able to take what we're discussing and learn more about it in case you'd like to. So it's going to be there for you, and you can use that if you want, but really, it's not necessary for the GMAT. Okay, so that said, let's get going with the very first part of our session. So we're going to start by looking at if-then conditionals. Okay, now you have a statement in front of you. All MBA students have laptops. Now, if you think about what this statement is telling us, right? So, in terms of the information that's giving us, we can package this information slightly differently. We can put it across in a slightly different way. For example, we could say if MBA student, then laptop, right? So, if someone is an MBA student, then he or she has a laptop. So, these two statements are pretty much the same. All we've done is we've taken that initial statement and we've packaged it into an if then statement. Quick check. Are we comfortable saying that both these statements are pretty much the same? Absolutely. So, okay, so we have two statements and they are pretty much the same. So, whenever we say if something, then something else, we're looking at a statement in the form if A, then B. In this sort of statement, when you say if A, then B, this part you can refer to it as the antecedent. And this part you can refer to it as the consequent. Now, I don't need you to remember these terms, but remember, antecedent is just the first thing, and the consequent is the thing that comes later. When we say if A then B, what that tells us is that A is a sufficient condition for B and B is a necessary condition for A. Now, I want you to imagine looking at this as part of, let's say, a diagram, right? Try to imagine the set relationship between MBA students and laptops. Let me draw part of it out for you. So you've got one set that's contained within another set. What I want you guys to think about is which one is on the outside and which one is on the inside. When you're ready, please unmute and let me know.
Laptops will be outside and MBA students will be inside.
All right, good. Now tell me why you said this.
Because there are multiple students or professionals who can own laptops, but the class that we are talking about here is that
Mhm,
if an MBA student is there, then he
mhm.
certainly owns a laptop.
Excellent. So if MBA student, then laptop is certain, right? That's important. So what
Yes.
that means is MBA student is contained within the set of laptops. So all MBA students will have laptops, right? This means that at a minimum, we must say something like these two will be the same size. At a minimum, that's what we have to say. But really, what we should be saying is MBA students is contained within the set of have laptops, or MBA students is within the set of people who have laptops. Does this make sense? All right, I've received a few confirmations. Excellent. Now, let's take a look at necessary and sufficient. When we say that if A, then B, what we mean is that if A is true, then B is also true. But we can't be sure that if B is true, then A is true. That changes if B is true only if A is true. Now, if we have if A, then B, and B only if A, well, A was already a sufficient condition, but now it's a necessary condition as well. Okay, so my question to you is, if we've got this necessary and sufficient relationship where we say B if and only if A, we can definitely say if A then B. But what more can we say over here? Right, hang on. Let me take a step back over here. Now, this may not be the best example now that the Focus Edition has just done away with geometry, but say that we have this relationship. If equilateral triangle, then two angles are equal. So if a triangle is equilateral, then we can say that statement 2, that two angles are equal, is also true. Quick check, are we okay with that? Got it. I've got a few yeses over here. Excellent. But we can't go the other way, right? That is, if two angles are equal, we can't say that the triangle is definitely equilateral, right? So remember, we can't say for sure that the triangle is definitely equilateral. Just a quick check. Yes, for that as well, please. Awesome. Now, if all three angles are equal, then definitely equilateral triangle. But we know that a triangle will be an equilateral triangle only if all three angles are equal, right? We can say this like this: a triangle is equilateral if and only if all its angles are equal. Now we can say that if all three angles are equal, it's an equilateral triangle. But here's the thing, we can also go the other way. That is, if it's an equilateral triangle, then we can say that all three angles are equal. This happens when we have an if and only if relationship. We can go AB, but we can also go BA. But let's hold on to this. Let's take a look at some other statements first. In fact, I should have done these statements first. If and only if will become easier to see once we take a look at some of these other issues. Now, the first one we're going to discuss is very straightforward. And we really should have actually started off with this. If A, then B. And then somebody tells you that A is true, right? So if you know that if A, then B, and you know that A is true, then you can say that B is true. Now, this is pretty straightforward, but let me just get a quick check. Is everyone okay with this? All right, I've received a few yeses on this. Excellent. Now, let's take a related statement. So, if A, then B, right? And now we're going to say that not B. So, we know that not B is true. When that happens, we can say not A. So, I'm going to spend just a minute on this because this one is quite important for us. I want you to take it to the MBA student example. Now, the first one that we discussed, right? If A, then B, right? So that was pretty straightforward. Now, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, if MBA student, then laptop, but if you take the opposite of laptop and you say, okay, laptop is not there, then can you say that not MBA student is true? Quick check. Let me see if this sounds good. I've received a couple of yeses. Okay, I've received a few yeses on this. Excellent. So, if not laptop, right? If for example, imagine that you're looking at a group of people and you see that okay, none of them has a laptop, then you can say that none of these people is an MBA student. Because remember, the group of MBA students is inside the group that has laptops. Now, till now, what we've seen is relationships that are valid, right? So we can actually say these things. But what about errors? Take a look at this one. If A, then B, and somebody says B is true, therefore A is true. Now, just to put this into perspective, the very first thing we discussed was if A, then B. If A is true, right? So we said that, okay, look, A is true, then we can say B is true. So effectively, the first thing we did was we said, okay, look, if MBA student is satisfied, then you know this about laptop. What do you know about laptop? That it's true. But now the question is, can we go in the opposite direction? If you know laptop is true, can you say MBA student is true? That is the question. Quick check. Let me have a yes or no on this. Excellent. So I've received a few no's on this. Perfect. So I think everyone is comfortable with the fact that if you say if A, then B, then you can't automatically go in the opposite direction and say, you know, B is true and therefore A is true. All right. Now, what we did a while back is we took a look at something called the contrapositive of a particular statement. What happens if we just directly deny A itself, right? So again, let's start. If A, then B, and we're saying not A is true and therefore not B is true. Let's take a look at what this would mean using our MBA student example. If MBA student, then laptop, and then we're saying, okay, we know that somebody is not an MBA student. And from this, we are saying that that person does not have a laptop. Can we say this? Karthik is saying no, Simran is saying no. Excellent. So, this sort of relationship is also an error, right? Awesome. All right. Now, what we've done till now is we've taken a look at some conditional statements, right? Now, these are pretty useful for your GMAT. Another big category that is quite useful is looking at the difference between numbers, like actual numbers, and proportions. So things like percentages, ratios, proportions, or rates, right? So knowing the difference and seeing when these differences are relevant is actually very useful in quite a few questions. Now, in some CR questions, you might have noticed that they're talking only about absolute numbers, or they're talking only about proportions or percentages, right? In some cases, if we're talking only about one, then information about the other may be completely irrelevant. For example, please go through this short piece of text. It says 25 years ago, players changed their rackets in only 10% of all tennis games. The current figure is 40%. And assume all tennis players start every game with new rackets. Now, my question to you is, would a statement like this be relevant in this case? Think about it, and whenever you're ready, please unmute and give me your thoughts.
So, Ajitesh here, what happens is probably now there are many more players who are playing tennis than the number 25 years ago. So, we cannot really conclude that players are playing many more matches. Probably there are many more players than 25 years ago. So, we need absolute numbers in order to completely infer this statement.
Okay, so I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to think about what could help you, right?
Right.
So, but what about the given statement? Players are playing many more matches. Does that help you in this particular situation?
So, are we talking about the number of players or the same players playing multiple times?
Generally, players. Each player is playing many more matches.
Yes.
Oh, but I get what you're getting at. So I agree that the wording over here is not very clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually clarify any questions you have. And the reason for this is straightforward. I came up with this example like in just a few minutes when I was making this presentation. It hasn't been run through students or any sort of check yet. So you're absolutely right. If you have any questions about this, if I can clarify something, let me know. The intention is to say that each player is now having to play many more matches than earlier.
Yes. So that's the case.
That's the case. Think about it. Let me know what you think. Once it helps us in strengthening. Once, go ahead. Tell me how and why.
Okay, so I'll take a number. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago, we were playing 100 matches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over 10% of the cases, the players had to change their rackets.
Mm-hmm.
And now the current figure is 40%. And the second argument that you have shared is that the players are playing many more matches than before. Let's say they're playing 200 matches.
Mm-hmm.
So, in some way, now 240% is, of course, more than the 10, the absolute value 10 that we had. So,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it kind of help us, in strengthening our uh, conclusion, maybe?
Think about it, and if you have a way, way in which you think it does strengthen, let me know. So think about it and
Sure,
let me know
sure,
whenever you're
sure,
ready.
sure.
All right. So I've got a few thoughts from people. In this case, I would probably say that this doesn't really help us. And why does it not help us? Because of that statement that says, assume that all of them start every game with new rackets, right? So the intention behind that statement is to say that everyone starts with a new racket. So it's not like you're using the same racket for more matches, right? So that is one possibility that I was looking to plug using that statement. So just a quick check, keeping that second statement in mind about everyone starting every game with new rackets, right? Are we okay saying that this statement is probably irrelevant about the number of matches? Let me have a quick yes or no. Of course, if you have some, okay, I see a couple of yeses. How about the rest of us? Excellent. Now, let me come to an interesting point about critical reasoning in general, right? And the verbal section in general. Remember what we discussed. Always, always, always go by context. So, context is like super important. So, when you see a situation where you're talking only about percentages or proportions, right? And you see an option which talks about absolute numbers, you should not automatically assume that it is irrelevant. You must evaluate the situation very carefully. So, for example, let me give you a slightly different option. For the earlier situation, but slightly different option. Players who play more matches, right, play in a less efficient style that places significantly greater stress on their rackets. Now, if you add this statement to the statements that we already have, right, then it changes the way we view the statement about playing more matches, right? So, in case we get more information, then maybe numbers become relevant. Quick check. Does this now sound like it could help us make that more matches into a correct option? Okay, I've received a few yeses on this. Perfect. So the takeaway from this is when you see something that's about, just numbers, don't immediately assume that something about proportions is irrelevant and vice versa. So if you see something like proportions and you see an option that's talking about numbers, don't immediately assume that they are irrelevant. It could be that the option is irrelevant for the situation that has been given to us, but that option may also be important, right? It depends on the situation. A couple more examples. Like on the of course on the internet we see positive reviews and negative reviews for products and services all the time. So if you just go by the number of positive and negative reviews, that could be misleading, right? So, just the number of positive and negative reviews without knowing anything about, let's say, the total number of people who are buying those products and services, it could be misleading, right? Quick check, everyone's agreed on this? Okay, I've got a few yeses on this. Perfect. The second one, right? It's like imagine that a company tells you, okay, look, our profits increased 2000% year on year. Now, now, if somebody's profits increased 2000% year on year, that's normally very, very impressive, right? But what if they started like last year, their profits were like 10 rupees or $10? Then suddenly a 2000% increase doesn't look all that great, right? So keeping some of these nuances in mind could be very, very important. Quick check, is everyone okay till here? Awesome. Okay, now the next one we're going to talk about is base rate. Now, if you think about a particular situation, right, there may be other statistics or other pieces of information that could change the way you look at this particular individual case. We're going to take an example to understand this, and I'll tell you why I'm taking this particular example. So this example is called the false positive paradox, and this term, right, false positive, false negative. In fact, let me write that down. This particular example that we're taking, I am in fact taking just to discuss these two terms, really. Now, the GMAT doesn't use these terms. As far as I know, it doesn't need you to already know these terms, false positive, false negative. But the underlying concept gets used in questions sometimes. So I just want to quickly check, has anyone here already heard these terms, false positive and false negative? Okay, I see a yes from Karthik and a yes from Fifi as well. Fifi, if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, please let me know. A no from Vanch, and Karthik is saying in COVID tests. I I totally agree. Shohini, yes, but not in terms of the GMAT. Right, got it. Now, as I said, the GMAT is not going to need you to know these terms, but effectively, these terms get used in some critical reasoning questions. Now, let's take a look at a situation where you have an AI software, right? An AI software that can analyze, let's say, your history, right? So it analyzes a person and then categorizes you as a criminal or not a criminal. So that's it. That's all it does. It puts people into two categories, one of two categories, and that's it. No third category. Either someone is a criminal or someone is not a criminal, just by analyzing. I mean, I don't know too much about technology, but whatever these AI things do, it just does all that and then tells you whether the person is a criminal or not a criminal. Now, my question to you is, how accurate would you want this sort of AI software to be? Think about a percentage and let me know. What would you think is a good percentage? Okay, Karthik is saying 100%, Vansh is saying 100%, okay. But what if your software can't be 100% accurate? Would you be willing to accept maybe 90%? Shoaini is going for 95, okay. Vanch is saying he will not accept 90%. Fair enough, fair enough. I think you guys have an idea about the underlying problem over here. But first, let's quickly discuss false positives and false negatives. So imagine that your software has flagged someone as a criminal, but that person is not actually a criminal, right? That's a false positive. So positive means it's telling you, oh, look, that person's a criminal, but that's a false positive. In other words, that person is not really a criminal, but is being flagged as a criminal. And a false negative is the software saying, oh, no, you're all clear, but actually that person was a criminal. Quick check. I think Vansh had indicated that, yeah, Vansh, is this comfortable? Are we comfortable with this? False positives and false negatives? Awesome. Now, the point we're getting at over here is the percentage is not something we can evaluate in isolation. That's the point we're getting at. A couple of you said that the percentage should be 100%, right? Ideally, yes, that percentage should be 100%. Let me write that down over here. So I had basically asked, how accurate should this thing be? Like if you show it a person, how many times, what proportion of cases should it be correct in? Now, ideally, it should be 100%. Now, there are a couple of things we want to discuss over here. The first one is some GMAT questions will say that, okay, look, there is a test that minimizes the number of false positives, right? So that's good. That's good. If it minimizes the number of false positives, that's a good thing. But in some cases, they'll try to give you an option which indicates that that particular test does not minimize the number of false negatives. That is, it could have some unintended consequence, right? Something could happen that you don't want. And that option could help you understand that the test is not good. Broadly speaking, what we're saying over here is in isolation, it's not enough to say that minimizing the number of false positives is a good thing. Sometimes we want or need to minimize both things, right? So either the false negatives or the false positives or both. So if your question says only one of them has been minimized, the correct option might say, oh, yes, the test does minimize the other one as well. So that helps you show that it's a good test, right? So a question could be built like that. Now let's come back to our example. 100%. Okay, let's say that's not possible. What about 99%? Quick check. Vansh, you're not comfortable with 90. Karthik, you also wanted 100. But would you take 99% at least? Karthik is saying probably. Okay. Vansh is saying at least 99%. Yes. Got it. Now, imagine that you are using this AI software in two different scenarios. Let's call them scenario A and scenario B. In scenario A, you are running that AI software against the entire population. And in the entire population, let's say only one out of every 100,000 people, or let's say one out of every 10,000 people is a criminal. Versus scenario B, in which case you are using that AI software against a lineup of suspects. So you already have reason to believe that some of these people are criminals, and you're using the AI software to identify the criminal from a group of suspects. So maybe that maybe each lineup is like a small number, maybe like 10 people, maximum 100 people. Now, what would be the better situation to use this kind of software in? Scenario A or scenario B? Shovani is saying scenario A. Vansh is saying A. Simran is also saying A. Guys, please unmute and give me your reasoning over here.
Ajitesh, what I believe is A is having a bigger sample size, and it will give us the result more accurately as compared to B, where we know for the fact that all of them are criminal or something. So yeah.
Hmm. So there is a difference in the populations, right? A and B. A is the general population. B already has some prior probabilities mixed in. And by prior probabilities, what do I mean? I mean, whoever this software is being run on, let's say the police already have a good idea about whether they could be criminals or not. So they have a reason to think that they were involved in some sort of crime. Let me try to show you the difference. If you run this AI software on the general population, what you wanted to find is that one criminal out of every, what, 10,000, right? But what is going to end up happening is it's going to give you a false positive. I mean, it's going to give you many more false positives than true positives. What I mean is, see, you wanted to find one criminal in every 10,000, but practically speaking, every 100 person that you're going to scan with this AI software, there's going to be one person who gets incorrectly flagged as a criminal. I mean, just a regular person, just like you and me, getting flagged as a criminal. Every 100% that's going to happen. Right? So, practically speaking, because there are many more non criminals and criminals, we're just going to go out and say that, look, every 100 you're going to get a false positive. You're just going to keep on doing that until you hit your 10,000, right? Quick check. Guys, do we see the problem with scenario A? Okay, Shohini and Simran have said yes. Advitya, scenario B is adding some sort of prior probability into the mix where you already have a reason to believe that the person is more likely to be a criminal. In scenario A, you have no such reason. This is just the general population, the normal rate of being a criminal. Okay, Vansh is saying yes. Karthik, quick check. Are we comfortable with this?
So, Ajitesh, what I'm getting out of this discussion is that we need to minimize the false positives, which in case A are higher, the numbers are higher, And in case B, because we have introduced some a priori information, the false positive cases are minimized, right?
See, let me take a step back. When we say that we need to minimize false positives and false negatives, right? Ideally, we'd want to minimize both, right? Agreed? Any kind of false positive or false negative, agreed?
Yes.
Right? In some cases, that's not really possible. You have to have a trade off, right? So some GMAT questions are going to exploit that. They're going to say that, okay, look, this test is really good at doing this, right? But you need to show that the test is not good. So the correct option could say the test is not good at identifying or correctly classifying this. Do you see the pattern?
Okay.
Right?
So we
So,
are weakening it from some other way.
yes, we could weaken it by saying that although it minimizes one of the two, it doesn't minimize the other. And depending on the situation, false negatives might be more important, false positives might be more important, or they both may be important, depending on the situation. Right? But the
Right.
question could ask you to strengthen or weaken. And to strengthen, you could say, yes, it does minimize the other one also. So it's a good test. But to weaken, you could say that, oh, it does minimize the first one, but it doesn't minimize the other one. Right? Better?
Yes. Okay.
Excellent. Now let's come to generalizations. Generalizations are also important for us. Right? Now, in a generalization, there are two major things that we're going to want to keep in mind. The first one is sample size. Now, what I'm going to tell you is going to be very broad, but basically, what I want to say is that small sample size is a problem, right? Now, the thing about the GMAT is that the GMAT is just normal English, as we discussed. So it's very hard to say exactly what a small sample size is. But I'm going to give you my best guess. My best guess is if it's 30, you should be okay. I mean, just about okay. If it's something like 50 or 100, then it really should not be a problem. But if it's very small, if the sample size is very small, if it's like you have just, surveyed maybe 10 people, and from those 10 people, you are, coming to a conclusion about maybe the entire country, that's probably going to be a problem. Now, I'm not sure whether you agree with this or not. I mean, I've actually had discussions with students. Like one student was from the Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta, right? And he had a lot to say about this particular point. But before we get into anything else, I just want to quickly check, does this sound okay? That if your sample size is like 50 to 100, it's not a problem. It's okay. Your sample size is probably large enough. But if it's like 10 or 20, then it's probably too small. Or have I not explained myself properly? Just give me an idea. Give me a yes or a no. Are we comfortable with this? Or unmute and ask your questions. Okay, I've got a few yeses on this. Perfect, perfect. So, aren't all sample sizes to Karthik? Can you just unmute and ask your question, please?
So, Ajitesh, so what I mean is,
Hmm.
don't you think that a sample size of 30 or 50 or 100 really depends on the context? Because if you're talking about, suppose whom did I vote for? So in an election, if I take a sample size of just 50 voters, don't you think it's too small a sample size to really infer who's going to win? So don't you think that when I say a small sample size, probably we need to have a context there?
So, Karthik, can I just quickly check? Do you already have some background in statistics, something that you've learned that you're bringing in over here?
A bit because I have this physics background, so but not
Right.
something dedicatedly in statistics.
Right, right. Oh, even from a related field, that's what I was asking about. Because what you are saying is correct, right? So determining a good sample size is context dependent, right?
Yes.
But for the types of situations that you see on the GMAT, right? Let's say that your GMAT question is something like this. In a newspaper survey, they found that people are more likely to support some policy of the government, right? And you are asked
Okay.
to weaken that. And one of your options says the sample size for the newspaper survey was 100. Now, depending on what you are trying to do, that 100 may or may not be enough. Agreed?
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is in a GMAT question, that 100 is probably enough.
Okay.
Because in this case, of course, I can be 100% sure about this because there is an actual GMAT question that does the same thing. as in it asks you to weaken and then gives you one option that says the sample size is 100. But again, your point is valid and it's well taken. All I'm saying is, in most cases, what's going to happen is your GMAT critical reasoning questions are going to be too small to give you the amount of detail that you need to calculate the sample size, like a good sample size for a particular level of confidence. It's not going to happen. Your questions are too small, and the GMAT is not technical enough for that. So my best guess is, if it's reasonably large, like 50, 100 or more, then yes, it could be a problem, but it should be deprioritized as an option. You should probably expect the correct option to be something else. But if it's
Okay,
really
got it.
tiny, like 10 or 20, then that option should be front and center in your mind.
Okay, okay.
Awesome.
So I so I
Uh-huh.
need to take the option which categorically mentions the sample size with a pinch of salt. So I need to also explore other options before selecting the one with the sample size, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay,
And generally, that's a good habit in purple. So if you see an option that's about sample size, you should definitely be looking at the other options as well.
okay,
All right, let's continue with the other main thing that we need to consider when it comes to the sample. So, the representativeness of a sample, right? So, let's say that you have some sort of poll or some sort of study or survey, something, right? And it's based on a sample. You are drawing some conclusion about the population using a sample. There are a lot of things that could go wrong over there. The methodology may be flawed, right? So, for example, and these are just like a couple of examples. There could be some sort of cherry picking of the data or the results that could be going on. So, sometimes researchers will pick only those things that they are interested in, that help them show whatever they want to show, and they'll disregard everything else. So that's one problem with methodology, right? Another problem could be something like leading questions. If somebody at the end of, let's say, a movie asks you, after watching this amazing award winning Oscar nominated movie, what do you think about the performances of the leading actors, right? That's a leading question, right? They're already making you think in a particular way. So methodology may be flawed. So if you're looking at weakening a situation that involves a sample, you may end up saying that the methodology is flawed. Or the correct option may end up doing that. Or the correct option may strengthen, right? In a strengthened question, it could help you understand that the methodology is correct. That is, we have reason to trust the study or the survey, whatever we're looking at. Another situation could be something like selection bias. So self-selection, survivorship bias, and time interval, right? So time interval, sometimes what happens is people will look at only that part of a study that helps them, like let's say the first 2 months, right? So, for example, if you're performing a clinical trial of a medicine, right, and you're supposed to evaluate the effects of that medicine over a period of years, but you look at that medicine after like 1 month and you say that, oh, nobody's showing any negative side effects. So let me just say the medicine's okay, right? That's the wrong time interval. So you're just picking the time interval that suits you. Self-selection is more like you are not really creating a random sample. Basically what you're doing is you're allowing people to respond. So for example, let's say you send out some sort of questionnaire, right? And it's not like you made it random. People can choose like who responds to you. That's an example of self-selection. And survivorship bias, I actually remember this very, very interesting example. I think this is one of the most famous examples. During World War II, the US was looking over for a way. So they found that the planes, right, their bombers were coming back with a lot of damage to these areas, right? So these areas were the most heavily damaged in the planes that came back. So they were looking to improve these planes and add some sort of extra armor to these planes. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to add the armor to these areas that were hit so badly in all the planes that were coming back, right? What do you guys think about this? Is that the correct thing to do? I was very surprised when I heard the answer. I'm not sure how you guys will think about this. So, should they add armor to the areas that are the weakest? That seem, sorry, not the weakest, that have been hit the hardest in the planes that have come back.
So, Ajitesh, probably these were the areas which were not too damaging for the planes. They could still fly and land. The other area, the central area, that was the most critical one. The planes that were hit there could not survive and eventually probably crashed.
That is very good. The first time I heard this, I was so surprised. I mean, I was really taken aback. But Karthik's explanation is absolutely spot on. So, what's happening here is if we added armor to these areas that seem to have been hit the hardest, the problem there is the planes we are analyzing would be the planes that have survived, right? So, these planes have survived taking hits to these areas. Now, which planes did not come back? The ones that took hits to other areas. So the armor should be added to those parts of the plane, not to the ones that can be survived. And that's survivorship bias. Another very good example of survivorship bias is business leaders, right? A lot of people will say that, people like, let's say, Steve Jobs or, anyone, Elon Musk, people will say that a lot of them will say that, oh, these guys are geniuses, right? But other people will say, oh, they're just the ones that maybe survived, right? Maybe there were other entrepreneurs who were equally skilled, equally hardworking, but for whatever reason could not have the same level of success. So that's another example of that. All right, quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this? Generalizations? Okay, I've received a couple of confirmations. Even debriefs of 750 plus caller on YouTube, it appears that on yeah. So what Karthik has touched on is a very, very, yeah, I totally get what you're saying. YouTube, GMAT Club, these are not representative of actual test taking experiences. I get that, and you're absolutely right. Yes. Okay, now let's move on to causation. Now, when you're talking about causation, right, there are a few errors that are important for us from an exam perspective. The first one is single cause, right? If there are actually multiple causes for something, but the question ends up thinking, oh no, only one of them caused it, right? So, for example, if A, B, and C could have caused something together, or maybe A and B, but not C, could have caused something, and you just assume that one of those things, without considering the others, you just assume that one of those things caused something, then you're making this sort of mistake. So that's one error when it comes to causation. Another one is post hoc. It basically means after this, therefore because of this. So sometimes just because something happens after something else, we assume that the first thing was the reason for the second thing. That may not be true, right? Now let's come to the most important one for us, correlation, right? Now, some people would refer to this as cum hoc, right? But we're just going to call it correlation. If two things happen together, then there is absolutely no guarantee that there is any sort of causal relationship between the two of them. So you might have heard it expressed like this: correlation does not imply causation, right? So if you have a correlation between two things, so if two things are correlated, in fact, actually, let me take a step back. I should explain this. See, if, for example, A goes up and B goes up at the same time, right? Or A goes down and B also goes down at the same time. Or A goes up and B goes down. We'd say that these things are correlated. Now, if we take one step further and say that on the basis of this correlation, we're going to say that A causes B, that A is literally the reason for B, then we may be making a mistake, right? So we'll have to evaluate. Maybe if the question is a weaken option, then we could supply one of the strategies that we'll just discuss to weaken that. So one way to weaken this sort of relationship is to say that it's complete coincidence. That yes, these two things are moving together, but they are completely independent of each other. It's just coincidence that they're moving together. The other one is there is a common cause. So if you can imagine it like this: A is going up, B is going up, but actually there is something else, C, that is responsible for both of them. So C is happening, and therefore A is happening, and B is happening. But it's not because A is related to B, it's actually A is related to C, and B is related to C. When I say related, I mean C is the common cause. C is causing both of them. That'll help you weaken this sort of relationship if it's given to you in a question. Another one is reverse causation. So again, imagine if two things are going up, A is going up, B is going up, and somebody says, oh, that means A caused B. You can weaken that. For example, an option may say that actually B causes A. So if B causes A, then you have weakened the relationship that has been given to you in the question. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with this? If you'd like any examples of this, of course, we can go into that, or if you'd like me to explain this in greater detail, I can do that as well. Otherwise, quick check, let me have a yes if you're comfortable with our discussion on causation. Okay, I've got a couple of yeses. How about the rest of us? Okay, excellent. All right. Now, there are a few other things that we could discuss, but really they're not all that important from a GMAT perspective. We'll just take a very quick look at some of them. Now, the first one is weak analogy. The only thing I want to point out over here is some people seem to think that looking at similar situations in general is not a very good strategy. So, one of the most common examples of this would be something like, okay, in city A, they have done something, right? And in city B, they are doing something similar. And city B, in fact, let me ask you guys this. Yeah, let me ask you. There are two cities, city A and a similar city B. And city A is doing something. Let's say it's implementing a policy, or it's introducing some sort of taxes or something. And city B is doing something similar. That is, I mean, they're doing the same policy, basically. They're enacting the same policy. Is that a way to strengthen? Like, you got some good results in city A. Is that a reason to believe that you'll get similar results in city B? Let me have a yes or a no on this. So you've got two similar cities. The first one enacted a policy, got good results. If city B also does it, then is that a reason to think that it'll get good results as well? Okay, Karthik is saying depends on context. Vansh is saying no. Advitya is saying no. Simran is no. Shoini is saying can be, but we need more support on this. Okay, so guys, we definitely need to discuss this. So what I find with most students is they tend to approach similar situations very negatively. Okay, let's be clear about one thing. If the situations are similar and you are doing similar things in similar situations, that is reason to expect a similar outcome, right? I mean, it would be very weird to say, oh, I have a similar situation and I'm doing similar things and I expect a completely different outcome, right? It would be very weird to say that. So let's agree that yes, it is a valid way to strengthen. I mean, like, if your question is a strengthen question, this is valid, but it's not perfect, right? That's what we need to remember. Valid, but not perfect. So you may want to look at other options, as you guys have already pointed out in the session, right? You may want to look at other options to be sure, but remember that at a fundamental level, this is a way to strengthen. So don't remove an option. Like, a lot of people just remove these options, saying that, oh, even though they're similar, they're not the same, right? They don't have to be the same. Your verbal questions are not always going to be perfect. Remember that. So look at the other options, but yeah, just keep an open mind on this. Of course, if you want to weaken, then you would show that there are differences in those situations. So you could say that city A had a different type of population, or city B had a totally different type of enforcement mechanism or whatever. Circular arguments. So in circular arguments, you're basically, so how would we put this? Your conclusion is actually the entire support, or it is part of the support. So people have a different way of looking at circular arguments, but this is how we normally look at circular arguments in our classes. So if somebody says that Ferraris cost a lot of money, and therefore Ferraris are expensive, that's a circular argument. So my conclusion is that Ferraris are expensive, and my support is that Ferraris cost a lot of money, which is basically the same thing, just restated in a different way, right? So if your conclusion is exactly the same as your support, or it is just a restated form of your support, that's circular. That's a circular argument. Composition division, sometimes what people do is they look at the whole, right? And they'll assume that parts of the whole share the same qualities as the whole, or of course, vice versa, right? They will look at it as if, okay, fine, we're dividing this and that's also okay. So this is also a possible issue. Now, a few more of these are there. I'm going to put them up over here, right? But we're not going to discuss these in detail. We can discuss these later. You can me about these. I can help you out, or you can look them up on your own. But for now, we're going to move on to practice questions. Quick check. Any of these terms that anybody is not sure about and wants to discuss right now? Or if you're good to go for practice questions, just let me have a yes in the chat window. Karthik, a one-line definition of each of these. Okay, so you mean from false equivalence onwards, right? So false equivalence is, have you heard of that saying that you're comparing apples to oranges? Yeah, it's basically that. If you say that two things share one quality, right, and therefore they are the same, that's false equivalence. It looks something like this. So let's say thing A and thing B, they share something, let's call it X. Just on that basis, we are saying that A and B are equivalent. That's false equivalence. False dichotomy is when you present a limited number of options to people without considering other options. Let's take an example of a football team, right? So if somebody says that your football team, right, let's call it ABC, your football team has won has not won any matches, right? Any games or matches. And therefore, we are saying that this team, ABC, has the maximum number of losses. Is that a good argument? Quick check, let me know. Oh, Shoidi's saying yes. No. Right. So what's happening over here is they think that it has not won any matches, right? So this football team has not won any matches, and therefore it has the maximum number of losses. But they are not considering the possibility of draws, right? So it's entirely possible that this team has not won any matches, but it's also possible that at the same time they've not lost any matches, right? So this thing seems to be equating your right. So that's false dichotomy. Now, as far as language is concerned, that would cover things like vagueness and multiple meanings. But strawman is when somebody takes like an exaggerated version of a position and destroys it, right? And tries to use that to pretend as if they've taken apart the earlier position. So, for example, if you say that, I don't want policy X in this city, right? They will exaggerate that. They will create a different version of that and destroy that particular argument, and then say that yeah, yours is also destroyed along with that. Ad hominem is basically just an attack to a person. You're attacking the character of the person. An example of that would be something like someone has said that AI is absolutely not out to destroy all of us, not even in its wildest dreams. Or in the case of AI, it would be its wildest hallucinations. But somebody says that, okay, look, AI is not out to destroy us, therefore AI is safe. Um, and you attack the source, that person. You say that, okay, but you are the CEO of a company that stands to profit significantly from AI. You attack the person instead of their argument. That's ad hominem. Now, ad hominem is not always incorrect, but I mean, if it's relevant, then it's not actually a bad strategy. A lot of people use it, but the point is, it must be relevant. Red herring is a distraction. Basically, you throw someone off with something completely different, unrelated. And appeal to authority is again not a bad thing. In most cases, appeal to authority is the only practical thing we can do these days. An example of that would be anytime that you refer, okay, doctors have said something, therefore we should assume something. Okay, quick check. Karthik, is that okay? Like a quick look at some of these. Awesome. All right, so all of us are ready to get started on questions. Please go ahead. This is your first question. As always, you will have 2.5 minutes, half a minute to find the question, and 2 minutes to solve it. Please start. Okay, that's 2.5 minutes. Please check your answers. If I remember correctly, the correct answer is option D. D for Delta, the fourth option. Quick check. Were we comfortable with option D, or was there another option that looked good? Okay, Karthik is saying comfortable with D. Showen is also comfortable with D. Fair enough. Also, of course, just a quick look at the difficulty level of the questions in our classes. Most of the questions we do are high difficulty, so sometimes they may take more time than we give you. But let's go through this particular situation. Now, in this question, what I really look at is basically, I think there's one option that sometimes confuses people. If I remember correctly, that's option C. So, what I would really want from your side is for you to just read option C and then explain it back to me. Like, what is it telling you? And then, of course, we could look at any other options that you guys want to discuss. But yeah, that's my question to you guys. Please look at option C. In fact, let me put option C up over here. So, option C, and tell me what it's saying. Just understand it. You don't have to tell me why it's wrong. Just read it and tell me what it's trying to say. Karthik, in case you're saying something and not audible, you may have to check your microphone. So if you click the drop down on the microphone icon, you may be able to select a different microphone.
So I was stating that there are two claims that the option is talking about.
Mhm,
So the claim first is that it has to necessarily follow from the conclusion, the argument's conclusion.
mhm,
And he's saying that that claim, which has to necessarily follow from the claim, is being confused with the claim, with the conclusion, with the claim that will follow from the conclusion only if there is a high degree of probability with us in terms of the claim. So it basically says that there is a claim which has to follow always, and there is
mhm.
another claim which will only follow if there is a high degree of probability.
Right. We'll just change the first one slightly. In the first one, the direction is reversed. So let's, as you correctly pointed out, let's make two boxes over here. The first box is for a claim from which the argument's conclusion would necessarily follow. So when we say a claim from which the conclusion would follow, it means we're looking at it like this: conclusion, claim. And because it says necessarily follow, I'm going to put 100% over here. So a claim from which the conclusion would follow. So the conclusion follows from the claim. And that is being confused with a claim that would follow from the conclusion only with a high degree of probability. So a claim that would follow from the conclusion, remember, so from the conclusion with a high degree of probability. So I don't know, maybe what, 90%? I mean, okay, just to be clear, I'm just writing a number over here. I'm not saying that the option says this. Okay, the option just says high degree of probability. And finally, when it says it confuses a claim from, I mean, this claim with that claim, what they're basically saying is they mistake one claim for the other. So that's what this option is getting at. This is probably the hardest part of this question. It's the option that gets, I mean, most students ask about. Just a quick check. Are we comfortable with what option C is saying? So let me have a yes or no, or unmute if you have questions.
Ajitesh, can you repeat this one once more?
Absolutely. So when we say a claim from which the conclusion would follow, are you comfortable saying that the conclusion is being derived from that claim?
No.
Okay, a claim from which the conclusion would follow.
Okay.
Oh, if you're not sure about the phrasing, this is what they're trying to tell us. So when they say something would follow from something, what they're saying is it is derivable from that thing.
Okay.
Okay. So if the conclusion follows from that claim, it means the claim is the support for the conclusion. Right? And then we say a claim that would follow the second half. A claim that would follow from the conclusion means now the conclusion is being used as support for some claim. So follow from means derived from.
Okay.
Right? And now we have these two things. And when we say we mistake X or confuse X with Y, what we mean is we think that X is Y. I mean, mistakenly.
Okay.
Quick check. Slightly better?
Hmm.
Awesome. All right. Now, let me check on this question. This is a flaw question, and flaw questions are actually very, very useful for practice. I don't want to overemphasize their importance because you normally don't see too many flaw questions on the GMAT, but I feel that they are good practice. Now, because we don't have that much time today, I just want to quickly check. Do you guys have any doubts in this question?
So, Ajitesh, just one thing I
Mhm.
wanted to know about this option. So, nothing of this sort is happening in the argument, right? So, this is not relevant to our argument, isn't
That's
it?
right. It is not
So,
a
there
good
are,
description
yeah,
of what is wrong with the argument
okay.
because it doesn't seem as if anything like this is happening in the argument.
And
Actually, let me take a
one
step back.
more,
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
yes, please. Yeah, I just had another confusion with the option E, and
Hmm.
I eliminated that option on the basis that it states that any one corporate employee may work no overtime. So,
Hmm.
is that the reason why we have to eliminate E? So that because that was the reason I eliminated E.
That is correct.
Well,
If one
okay,
employee does not do that, that's not a problem. This argument is fine even without that.
okay.
But yeah, let me take a step back over here. So I think I was trying to rush through this question because I was trying to finish by 12 o'clock. Just a quick check. If we go over by half an hour, how many of you would still be okay with that? Let me have a yes or a no. Okay, we've got a few yeses. Okay. So Simran, that's fine. But yeah, let me take a little bit more time on this. Let me not rush this. Let's go back to the stimulus. Okay, let's look at this argument. The argument says that the average amount of overtime per month worked by an employee in the manufacturing division, right? So you've got the company, let's call it H. It's got a manufacturing division. And the average overtime is 14 hours over here. Now, most employees of this company work in the manufacturing division. So, most of the employees are here. And whatever other divisions they have, clearly this would not be most employees, right? Furthermore, the average amount of overtime per month worked by any employee in the company generally does not fluctuate from month to month. So they're saying that the amount of overtime that an employee works is pretty much stable. And now they come to the conclusion. Therefore, each month, most employees of this company almost certainly work at least some overtime. So, how are they getting to their conclusion? They are getting to their conclusion on the basis of this. So, they are saying most employees are in this division, and the average overtime in this division is 14 hours. And therefore, most employees of the company work at least some overtime. Why? Because most employees are in the manufacturing division. So, what is the problem over here? The problem is that some employees might be working way more than 14 hours of overtime, right? And those people are dragging the average up. So, even if most employees are in the manufacturing division, that 14 hours might be coming from a very small number of people. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with this? Awesome, I've got a few yeses on this. Perfect. Now, the question says the debater's argument is most vulnerable to criticism on which of these grounds? Pretty standard. Let's take the first option. It takes for granted that the manufacturing division is a typical division of the corporation with regard to the average amount of overtime. Now, when would this be the case? This would be the case if you looked at the manufacturing division and said, I'm going to use the manufacturing division to generalize to the other divisions, right? So the other divisions must also be like this, and therefore the entire company must be like this. But that's not what this argument is doing. It does not assume that. So when we say it takes for granted, we mean it assumes. It does not assume that the manufacturing division is like the others. And why does it not need to do that? Because it's already told you that most employees are in the manufacturing division. So this author actually does not care about the other divisions at all, because his or her entire argument is based on the manufacturing division having the most employees. Quick check, is everyone okay with why A is out? Okay, I've received a few yeses. Okay, for now I'll carry on. And of course, if you have any doubts, you can always ask them later as well. Let's take a look at B. It takes for granted that if a certain average amount of overtime is worked each month by each employee, then approximately the same amount of overtime must be worked by each month by each employee of the manufacturing division. Now, this means you're taking something about the entire company and you're applying it to the manufacturing division. Again, this argument does not do that. It talks only about the manufacturing division. It doesn't need the manufacturing division to be similar in any way to the other divisions. So option B is also out. Option C is the one we just discussed. Very complicated, but at the end of the day, there's nothing like that in the argument. Absolutely nothing. So option C is out. Option D, it overlooks the possibility that even if, on average, a certain amount of overtime is worked by the members of some group, many members of that group may work no overtime at all. This is the big problem over here. This is the problem with the argument. They think that most employees are in the manufacturing division, and the average for the manufacturing division is 14. So most employees work at least some overtime. But that 14 might be influenced by a very small number of people, and that could throw the conclusion off. And option E, as Karthik mentioned, it overlooks the possibility that even if most employees work some overtime, any one corporate employee may, in some months, work no overtime. This does not matter to the argument. One employee does not matter to the argument. Quick check, is everyone comfortable with this question? All right, I've received a few yeses on this. Let's move ahead for now. As always, we can come back to specific doubts later on. All right, here's your next question. Again, 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead. Okay, that's 2.5 minutes. Now, in this question, first of all, please check your answers. The correct answer is option A, the first option. But in this question, the one that I'm most interested in is option D. At least I think that's the one. Uh, just give me a second. Let me just have a quick look at these options because I can't read them right now. Yes. So I would like you guys to tell me why. Okay, firstly, why option A is good, but also why option D is not the correct answer, even though I told you some time back that we should be open to similar situations. Take your time. Whenever you're ready, please unmute and walk me through this. A versus D. And of course, if you have questions about any other options, we can take those as well.
Hi, Ajitesh.
Go ahead.
So for option A, it's basically telling that during the same time period, others network organizations also see a drop in the viewership. So that actually can be the cause of the drop in the viewership for the same for this organization in question, and it might not be the reason that they have aired something which is controversial.
Good. So maybe it is something which is affecting the
Yeah.
entire industry, right?
Yes. So it's giving another reason for the drop.
That's
And
absolutely correct. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and for D, they are saying that this was not the first time that this network news organization has aired a controversial report on the economy that has inspired viewership to complain to the network. So if this is true, then the basically owners or whoever is on the authority of the news organization should have claimed that this is the reason that there is a like drop in the viewership, because they have faced similar kind of situation before. And in this option D, they never mentioned that when this kind of situation happened, there is a drop in viewership or not.
Perfect. So when we read this option, sometimes, we just mentally fill in the gaps because we just read something about, we just read something similar in the question. But Shohini is absolutely correct. This option doesn't tell us what happened. All it's telling us is this is not the first time they've done this. But what happened, when they did this before? Did viewership drop? Did it not drop? Right? So we don't have that information. And without that information, this is not a good comparison. Quick check. Is everyone okay with why A is correct and why D is out? Okay, awesome. I received a few yeses on this. On this question, I think let's move ahead. But if you guys want to discuss any options in this one, so in this question, this is the only thing that I wanted to discuss: A versus D. Simran, no, that's a good question. No, this is not a high difficulty question. So this is definitely not high difficulty. Probably medium, maybe low. I'm not sure, but definitely not high difficulty. Any other options that you guys want to discuss? Otherwise, are we good to move on to the next one? Let me have a yes or a no. Are we okay with moving on to the next question? Okay, excellent. All right. Now, this is a really nice question. Please go ahead. 2.5 minutes. Okay, so that's 2.5 minutes. First of all, please check your answers. The correct answer for this question is option D, the fourth option. Now, I'd like you guys to walk me through all of these options, but let me quickly summarize the stimulus. I mean, it's quite short, quite straightforward. It just says that this guidebook writer has visited hotels throughout the country, and he or she has noticed that in those built before 1930, the quality of the original carpentry work is generally superior to that in hotels built after 1930. And the conclusion drawn by this writer is clearly carpenters working on hotels before 1930 typically worked with more skill, care, and effort than carpenters who worked on, the later hotels. And remember, the support is just the quality of original carpentry is generally superior in the pre 1930 hotels. Now, the question says, which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the guidebook writer's argument? So, our task is quite straightforward over here. We just need to weaken the argument. Let's start. Anyone who's ready with option A, let me know. How would you take it out?
Basically, here they are comparing the hotels to other structure, houses, and stores. But in the question, the comparison is 1930s hotel versus hotels which has been built after 1930.
Very good. So you've got hotels having better carpentry than other structures such as houses and stores. So what we needed is something that's within hotels, not hotels versus non-hotels. The other part of option A that I'd like to quickly point out is option A seems to be, so I like to call it a constant, as in it's basically saying that hotels have better original carpentry than other things, right? Like other structures. But that's not changing. It's not as if before 1930 you had something else, now you have something else. It's just a constant. And when you have a constant, it's very hard to see how that is going to help explain some sort of difference in skill, care, and effort. So, okay, option A is out. Let's take a look at option B. Hotels built since 1930 can generally accommodate more guests than those built before 1930. Okay, what's wrong with this one?
To the argument at all.
Simran, I see that you've unmuted, but I'm not able to hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh
Can
yeah,
you
now I
still
can.
not?
Now I can. Now I can. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so it's not related to the argument at all.
Why?
And hence the question does not talk about the guests. Um, hence it's irrelevant.
Right, but more specifically, it doesn't talk about the number of guests, right?
Right.
Perfect. So what we'll say is option B. Even if you combine everything in the argument, we have absolutely no reason to believe that the number of guests is somehow related to the quality or the skill, the care, and the effort that the carpenters you know put in. So just the number of people that a structure is meant to accommodate doesn't on its own tell us anything about the skill, care, and effort of the carpenters who make that structure or who make the original carpentry in that structure. So option B is out. Good. Now, a very interesting option, C. The materials available to carpenters working before 1930 were not significantly different in quality from the materials available to carpenters working after 1930. What do we think about this one?
So I think this is in a way strengthening the argument or
Hmm.
not weakening it, because here we are seeing like we are comparing the quality of construction or the skills of the carpenters. So
Hmm.
something is different, which we are getting to know from the argument. But this option is basically strengthening it. It is telling that the material is constant, almost constant. So nothing is different. So there might be a skill difference or something else. So this is not weakening the argument.
That is right. Imagine if the materials were different. That could give you an alternate explanation for why the original carpentry is better in your pre 1930 hotels. But if the materials are the same, it is more likely that whatever difference we're seeing is actually attributable to the skill, care, and effort. Quick check. Let me know, is everyone comfortable with why C is out? I've received a few yeses. Quick check. How about the rest of us? Karthik, Simran, Shohini, Fifi. Advitya made the point. So, Fifi, is this one okay? Excellent. Now we come to the answer. Option D. Why is D correct?
Hi.
Go
So
ahead.
basically, this one is saying that if the carpentry quality is really superior for a building, then the building is less likely to get demolished. So,
Mhm.
on contrary, then might be whatever the carpentry which is of not good quality, which has been in there 1930, those building must have been demolished or something like that. So that during that point, maybe both kind of carpentry work exist,
Mhm.
and that actually weakens the point that at this point of time the carpenter skill is not as much as good as it was at that point of time.
Very good. So you are absolutely correct. Effectively, what Shoini is saying is only a certain type of hotel has survived till now. So all the ones with good carpentry, right? They survive, and the ones with bad quality, I mean, bad carpentry or not good carpentry, they tend to fall into disuse and be demolished. So the better the quality of carpentry, the more likely that building is to survive. Think about option D like that. So option D tells us the better the quality of original carpentry, the less likely that building is to fall into disuse and be demolished. So it's the same as saying the better the quality of original carpentry, the more likely that building is to survive. So what happens if you look at your pre 1930 hotels? The only ones that have survived till now are the ones with good carpentry. So what's happening to the sample that this guidebook writer is looking at? The sample is not a good sample. It is not representative. It contains the best of the old hotels and a more general selection of more recent hotels. So this is a bad sample. And because the sample is bad, that weakens the guidebook writer's argument. Quick check. This is the main option I wanted to discuss in this question. Is everyone comfortable with what Shohini and I see Karthik have also said? Quick check. Advitya's comfortable. Karthik is, Simran is yes. And yeah, I think Fifi's just about to, yes. Excellent. All right. Now that brings us to a fun option, the last option. Now, I say that this is a fun option because I sometimes receive, let's say, very imaginative responses for why E is wrong or why it is right. Let me turn this over to you guys. The average length of apprenticeship for carpenters has declined significantly since 1930. What do we think? Like, how do we remove it? Or I don't know. Some people tell me that E should be correct. How do we mark it, or why would we mark it? Give me your reasoning for this.
I think it strengthens the argument
Mhm.
in a way,
Why?
because if the average length of apprenticeship has reduced, then there's a possibility that the skill and care and effort has reduced after 1930, and hence it strengthens.
Okay, good. Anybody with a different point of view on this?
So, Ajitesh,
Hmm.
if I were to mark this option, I would think it this way because you asked, no, that why would somebody mark this option? So I'll have to certainly wrongly assume that it was not the more skill, care, and effort, but it was their training that led to the decline in the quality. So I'm just introduce another cause which really weakens the argument. So if I were to think it this way, then I would be thinking option E.
Excellent, excellent. So Karthik is absolutely correct. Now let's start with Simran's point. Simran's basically telling us that if the average length of a so what is apprenticeship? It's your training period, right? If the training period has declined significantly, again, let me stress this significantly, then you would expect the carpenters nowadays to be less capable of skill, care, and effort. So option E seems to be strengthening the guidebook writer's argument. It's the opposite of what the question is asking us to do. But as Karthik pointed out, if you become really imaginative, like if somebody comes around and says, what if the training is bad training and the less you have of that training, the better it is for you, right? Or if they come around to you and say, What if the carpenters nowadays are just so smart that, whatever they used to complete in like 10 years earlier, now they do it in like 2 years? The only thing to say or to keep in mind over here is, in verbal, we always think about what is plausible, not necessarily just possible. So if something is a low probability event, in our first session, I think we called it an edge case. We have to be very careful about that. So we must go for the most likely interpretation, not just something that has like a very low probability, but it is just about possible. Awesome. Quick check. Is everyone comfortable with this question? Are we good to move on to the next one? All right. I've got a few yeses on this. Now, the next question is also a very good question. Please go ahead. You have 2.5 minutes. Okay, so that's 2.5 minutes. This is definitely a tough question. Let me walk you through the first one or two options, and then I'll turn this over to you guys. First of all, let's quickly take a look at the information that we have. Studies in restaurants show that the tips left by customers who pay their bills in cash tend to be larger when the bill is presented on a tray that bears a credit card logo. Now, I'm going to just draw a small line over here, because now we get the hypothesis from the consumer psychologists. So their hypothesis is that simply seeing a credit card logo makes many credit card holders willing to spend more, because it reminds them that their spending power exceeds the cash that they have immediately available. I think the most important word to keep in mind, or the most important phrase to keep in mind over here, is it reminds them of their spending power. Now, why is this important? Because if you take a look at the task is, which of the following, if true, most strongly supports the psychologist's interpretation of the studies? So it's basically their hypothesis that we need to look at. And their hypothesis is that many credit card holders become willing to spend more because they get reminded that they have extra spending power. Now, let's take a look at option A. The effect noted in the studies is not limited to patrons who have credit cards. Okay, let's see what this is effectively telling us. If you have a credit card, and you get a bill which has a credit card logo on it, high tip. But the same effect is noted, with patrons who don't have credit cards. So if this effect is not limited to those who have credit cards, we can say that whether you have a credit card or not, it doesn't matter. The outcome is the same. So the effect noted in the studies is not limited to patrons who have credit cards. Whether you have a credit card or not, you get the same outcome. Now, this is a big problem for the hypothesis. The hypothesis is that seeing a credit card logo reminds many credit card holders that they have greater spending power than the amount of cash that they have. But if somebody doesn't have a credit card, then how do they get reminded of that extra spending power? Where is that higher tip coming from? So it seems that the hypothesis is incorrect. Quick check, yes or no on this if you're comfortable with A. Okay, I've got a few yeses. Okay, we can always come back to A. Let me take a look at B. Patrons who are under financial pressure from their credit card obligations tend to tip less when presented with a restaurant bill on a tray with a CC logo than when the tray has no logo. This is the correct answer. Now, in a lot of cases, what happens is people think that this is the opposite of what I want. But actually, this is very, very important. I want you to imagine that option B is slightly different. I'm going to make a small change to option B. Patrons who are under financial pressure from their credit card obligations also tend to tip high when they get a bill with a credit card logo. Take your time and let me know what happens if we have this changed version of option B. Advitya saying it's weakening. Yes. Why? Advitya, feel free to unmute and let me know.
Because the main point is that psychologists' hypothesis is based on a thought or a realization that we are under, like the consumers are under less, or they can spend more having a credit card, so they are tipping more. So kind of correlation. But when we say like they don't have that ability to spend due to financial obligations, still they are spending. So it is basically weakening uh, that kind of thought.
Right. Let's say it's weakening the hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
So remember, when there is a logo, the tip is high, right? What is supposed to be weakened or strengthened over here is the interpretation of the studies. And the interpretation is that many credit card holders are willing to spend more because they remember, because the logo reminds them that their spending power exceeds the amount of cash that they have. That reminding part is so important. See, if you just give someone a logo, right, and they leave a high tip, you don't know why they're doing it, right? But the explanation is important. That's what this question is asking us to strengthen. So, if regardless of financial spending power, someone leaves a high tip, it means they are not getting reminded of their spending power. It means the logo is having some other effect on them, right? But not reminding them of their spending power. I'm not sure if I've explained this well. Let me know. Yes, if you're comfortable with why B is correct, or a no if you have doubts. Please unmute also. You can ask your questions. Okay, I've got 3 yeses, Shohini and Fifi. Okay, Fifi is confirmed. Shohini, is this one okay? Excellent. All right. So, yeah, if the people with financial pressure, right, the ones who are facing financial pressure, if they tend to tip less, it means that the logo is reminding people of their spending power. If they also tip high, it means the logo is having some other effect. It's not the reminding of spending power that was in the hypothesis. Okay. Now over to you guys. What do we think about option C? In virtually all the cases, the patrons who paid bills in cash did not possess any credit cards. I'm sorry, not any, did not possess credit cards. What do we think about this one?
If they did not possess the credit cards, then they not then uh, the question says that they'd be reminded of their spending power. That does not hold true anymore because if they don't possess a credit card, they don't have that spending power.
That is correct. So if people don't have a credit card, right, then how do they have that extra spending power? If virtually all the cases in the studies, that means whatever the study is looking at, it's basically people who don't even have credit cards. So, where exactly is that hypothesis coming from? Option C is out. Effectively, option C weakens the hypothesis. What about D for Delta? In general, restaurant patrons who pay their bills in cash leave larger tips than do those who pay by credit card. What's wrong with this one?
I think option D kind of means that having the credit card logo has no impact on the uh, on the person who's in the restaurant, uh, because whether they hold a credit card or not, they will end up paying higher if they pay in cash.
So I think what you're trying to say is that it's not connected to what we're discussing here.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's a valid interpretation. But another way of looking at option D is, see, it says patrons who pay their bills in cash, right? First of all, let's take a step back and understand why this may be irrelevant, because the question is about people who pay in cash. It's not about people who pay by credit card. Um, hmm. But think about it. If people who pay their bills in cash leave larger tips than those who pay by credit card, the group of people who pay by cash, right? These people may have a credit card or they may not have a credit card. The people who pay by credit card, they definitely have a credit card. So what D is telling us is those who pay their bills in cash, that means those who may or may not have a credit card, leave larger tips in general than those who definitely have a credit card. So, in some way, I mean, if we really stretch, this could mean that the people who definitely have or who are more likely to have greater spending power, they leave lower tips than those who pay by cash, right? So, in a way, option D might weaken. Now, I'm not saying that we have to look at it this way. I'm just saying that it's a possibility. Quick check. Are we comfortable with D? Both Simran's point and my point? Okay, I've received a few yeses on this. Fifi, is this one okay? And Showan is also confirmed. Excellent. Now let's take a look at the last one. I'll take this one. The percentage of restaurant bills paid with a given brand of credit card increases when that credit card's logo is displayed on the tray with which the bill is presented. This one has absolutely nothing to do with tips. It's just saying the percentage of bills paid with a given brand of credit card increases when you show that credit card's logo on the tray. Okay, great. But how does it explain anything about tipping, right? So we'd have to say that option E is irrelevant. Okay, it's an alternate finding. That's it. Yeah, it's just something else that they found. It's not helping you explain the hypothesis or strengthen the hypothesis in any way. Awesome. That brings us to the second last question. This is this has to be one of my all-time favorite questions. Please go ahead. 2.5 minutes. Right, so that's 2.5 minutes. First of all, please check your answers. The correct answer is A for alpha, the first option. Who would like to take this one?
Hi, Ajitesh.
Yeah, sure, Annie, please go ahead.
Yeah, so if A is the correct answer, is that they are saying that in the entire region there is only three chains who are operating the casinos,
Mhm.
all of them. And now Apex wants to completely acquire the El Dorado chain, which is one of the chains which has been active. Now, if they has to take that up, they have to sell five of its units, right?
Mhm.
Five of its casinos, basically. So, and after that, they will be left with only 20. But if they have to sell those five casinos and El Dorado is out of the game, then they have to sell those to Moneyland. So then
That is
Moneyland will land with 17 plus 5, which is 22. And it is
that is
higher.
that is 100% correct. So let me just quickly put Shohini's points down. So they've told us that Moneyland has 17. Now, Moneyland wants to expand, but Apex outmaneuvered Moneyland. So Apex is going to acquire El Dorado. And in order to acquire El Dorados, Apex must sell five casinos. So we're going to write this as A plus E minus 5, right? Because, see, if it has to acquire El Dorado, it must sell five. If it doesn't sell these five, it will not be able to acquire El Dorado. That's what the question is telling us. Now, they are saying that after this, they will be left with 20 casinos. And then, of course, they're saying that 20 is greater than 17. So Apex will have the most casinos in the state. So that's the information given to us. The question says, which of the following, if true, most seriously undermines the prediction? So it's a standard weekend question. A. Apex, Eldorado, and Moneyland are the only organizations licensed to operate casinos in the state. So remember what we discussed. Apex plus Eldorado, offload 5, will leave Apex with 20, right? But if Apex has to sell these 5 to acquire Eldorado, and the only other player in the market is Moneyland, so in order for the acquisition to proceed or be successful, these 5 must be acquired by Moneyland. And Moneyland is currently at 17. So if you add 5 to that, they will suddenly get a number that is more than Apex. So 22 is more than 20, and therefore we weaken the prediction. Quick check, is everyone agreed on this? So Shohini's explanation, is everyone comfortable with why A is correct? Excellent. I've got a few yeses on this. Simran, quick check. Is this one okay? Perfect. All right. Now, in this question, quick check. If you guys have any doubts with the other options, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on to the final question. Are we good to move on to the final question? Let me have a yes or a no.
Ajitesh, I just have one question in this.
Absolutely.
Isn't A an assumption as well? If I assume that there are other
Mhm.
parties, so how is it different? It appears to me as an assumption stated as a weakness because if I assume this, then it certainly weakens.
No. So you should not take the task as part of the stimulus itself. The stimulus, I'm sorry, not the stimulus. The stem does not have an argument as such. It's just the task that you're supposed to perform, right? So somebody is coming to some sort of prediction, and we now have to weaken it. But that person who came to that prediction does not assume option A,
Okay.
right? Because if they assumed option A, then they would know that their prediction is wrong,
Yes.
right? Awesome. Okay, now let's move on to the final question. This is also a very good question. Please go ahead. Okay, so that's 2.5 minutes. Now, we're going to be working through this question in detail, so we'll be taking every option on this one. But first, let's quickly summarize the information that we have. I'm sorry, first, please check your answers. The correct answer is B, B for Bravo. Now, let's go through the stimulus. It starts by saying it is widely assumed that people need to engage in intellectual activities such as solving crossword puzzles or blah, 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 blah. We're just going to ignore this part. In fact, however, simply talking to other people, that is, participating in social interaction, which engages many mental and perceptual skills, suffices. This is the conclusion. So they're saying that talking to other people, participating in social interaction, S is enough. And now they give us a reason for this or evidence for this. Evidence to this effect comes from a study showing that the more social contact people report, the better their mental skills. So they have a report which says that two things happen together: S higher, M higher, right? So S up, M up. That's the support for saying S is enough. So S can also do it because people with high S have high M. Now, before we move into the 5 options, quick check. Is everyone comfortable with the information that we have? Let me know if you have any doubts regarding the stimulus. Got a yes, got a couple of yeses. Very good. Now let's look at, okay, the stem. Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the force of the evidence cited? Again, nothing special. Option A. As people grow older, they're often advised to keep exercising their physical and mental capacities in order to maintain or improve them. Now, if you think about what this option is telling us, right, it's just saying that people are advised to exercise their physical and mental capacities if they want to, maintain them. But it doesn't tell us anything about whether the social interaction is enough or not enough, right? So remember, the question is not trying to convince us. I mean, the author is not trying to convince us that social interaction is like the only way to do it, right? That's not what they're saying. They're just saying social interaction is enough. You don't have to do anything else if you don't want to. So this option just says, okay, look, people are advised to exercise their physical and mental capacities in order to maintain or improve them, but it doesn't tell us anything about whether social interaction, talking to people, is enough or not. So option A is out. Now for the correct option, B. Many medical conditions and treatments that adversely affect a person's mental sharpness also tend to increase that person's social isolation. Now, the way they've worded it is the only reason that this question is a high difficulty question. This is one of the last questions in your official guide, and it is only because of the way they've worded it. Karthik, B doesn't reverse it. Reversal is slightly different. But you're right. This is related to that causation topic that we looked at earlier. Now, let's see what it's telling us. Many medical conditions and treatments, right? So I'm going to write MCT, medical conditions and treatments. What do these medical conditions and treatments do? They have two effects. The first one is an adverse effect on the mental sharpness. So I'm going to write that as M down. And what do they do? In addition to this, the medical conditions and treatments also tend to increase that person's social isolation. Increase the social isolation basically means it is an S down. So MCT has two effects. It reduces M and it reduces S. So in the study, they found that people with higher M have higher S. Well, there is a possible reason for that. A third cause. So when I say a third cause, what I mean is a common cause, a third factor, which is a common cause for both an increased M, a decreased M and a decreased S. So you have these many medical conditions and treatments that reduce both M and reduce S at the same time. So it is not a relationship between S and M. It is a relationship between MCT and S and MCT and M. therefore the relationship between S and M. So the question came to the conclusion that S can improve M. That has been weakened by showing that there is a common cause for both of these things. Quick check. I'm not sure I've explained myself properly, but quick check. Are we okay with this? Yes or no? Please unmute if you have doubts. Okay, I've got one yes from Simran and Karthik. Okay. What about Advitya, Fifi, Shohini? Guys, you can also unmute, please remember. Okay, I've got a couple more yeses. Fifi, just one last quick check. Is B okay? Excellent. All right, guys. Now take a look at C. Many people are proficient both in social interactions and in solving mathematical problems. Okay, great. But does your S actually help you with M or not? We don't know. Right? It just says many people are proficient in both. But what about the relationship between, S helping with M? C seems to have absolutely nothing to say on that. All right, let's take a look at D. Now, interestingly, a lot of people mark option D. Let's read it. The study did not itself collect data, but analyze data bearing on the issue from prior studies. What do you guys think about this? Keep in mind, a lot of people mark D and E on this one. How would we take option D out?
So basically, it doesn't weaken the statement. So even if they are collecting data recently or using an older data, if they are deriving to the situation, it doesn't actually weaken the statement.
That's right. So I think, when you analyze other studies, I think that you end up calling that kind of study a meta study or something. The point is that analyzing other studies in itself is not a bad thing, unless the other studies are bad, right? But remember, option D doesn't say that the other studies are bad. It just says that this study analyzed data bearing so relevant data from other studies. But the other studies may be good, right? So without any additional information, we cannot say whether the other studies are good or bad, right? And without that information, we can't mark option D. Is it a case of ad hominem?
So,
It
so
depends on how
Ajitesh,
they
why?
analyze it, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
So why I say so? Because it says that just because the study did not collect first-hand data, but it means it based its outcomes on other studies. So the study is not worthy enough to be considered. So in a way, I'm attacking the study rather than the findings that the study has.
Possibly, but I haven't used ad hominem in a sense where it is related to a study instead of a person. So I'm not 100% sure about that,
Okay.
whether we can apply it to a study as such.
Okay.
All right, now let's come to E. The tasks evaluating mental sharpness for which data were compiled by the study were more akin to mathematics problems than to conversation. You'd be surprised at how many people mark this option. So let's make sure we take a look at why E is wrong. Let me know when you're ready. How did you remove E? Or if you marked E, how would you remove it now? And just a quick check, I think I may not be audible. Can you guys hear me? Just give me a yes or a no on this one. Okay, right. So I was just checking if we can remove option E. I'm not sure if my audio went through, but whenever you're ready, let me know how we can take option E out.
Ajitesh, I
Hmm.
feel that this one is a little bit irrelevant
Okay, why?
because they are just focusing. They're in this option. They're saying that they're focusing more on the maths problem than to the conversation, right?
Mhm.
But both of them are pointing towards the same direction, right? So they said that the mathematical problems they need to solve to be more sharp, even if not mathematics, then at least conversation will help them, like if they are in a social kind of arrangement and talking to people and all of those things. So it is not weakening the weakening the question.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So let's go over that again. E says the tasks evaluating mental sharpness for which data were compiled by the study were more akin to mathematics problems than to conversation. So imagine that you gave someone a test, right, to evaluate their mental sharpness. Now, on that test, you gave them questions which are more like math problems. like 2 plus 2, right? Instead of conversation like problems, right? So more towards non math problems. Now, option E is saying that we should be suspicious of this finding or this statement that social interaction is enough. We should be suspicious of that just because the way the mental sharpness was measured involved questions that are more like math than conversation. But why is that a bad thing? Are math questions not a good way to measure someone's mental sharpness? I mean, is there any information in option E that tells us that math is just not a good way to measure that the methodology is flawed because of this? No. And therefore, E does not weaken. So, as Shohini pointed out, this is pretty much irrelevant for us. As long as we don't have a reason to think that problems that are based on math or more like math than conversation are bad, we don't have any reason to remove option E. Quick check, is everyone okay with why E is out? Okay. Now, that was a pretty long session, but these topics were very important. So, strengthen and weaken, as I said earlier, they are the most common questions that you'll get on your GMAT critical reasoning. So, once again, thank you all for staying till this time, and thank you so much for attending this session. You're welcome, Shirley. You're welcome, Simran. Karthik, you're welcome. And Aditya, you're welcome. Have a great day. You're welcome, Fifi. Have a great day.